April 3rd, 2026, 2:47 a.m. Eastern Mediterranean airspace. A $240 million MQ-4C Triton surveillance drone stops transmitting. Its last known position, 38,000 feet above the Gulf of Oman, 90 nautical miles from Iranian coastline. The U.S. Navy's most advanced maritime surveillance aircraft, wingspan of 131 feet, capable of surveying 2 million square nautical miles in a single mission, is gone. 16 hours later, the Pentagon confirms the loss. No further details. No recovery attempt announced. But 2,400 miles to the northwest, inside a windowless operations room in western Ukraine, a signals intelligence team barely notices. They don't need to, because 6 months before that Triton disappeared, Ukrainian defense intelligence had already built something the Americans never expected. A parallel surveillance architecture, homegrown, improvised, and about to prove more effective than anyone in Washington imagined. I'm your host at Ukraine Signal, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Today, we're breaking down how the loss of America's premier high-altitude drone exposed an intelligence gap that Ukraine had already filled, and how that parallel network led to one of the most devastating HIMARS strikes of early 2026. Because this isn't just a story about a lost drone. This is a story about a country that stopped waiting for help and started building its own eyes in the sky. Let's start where this really begins. Not in the Gulf of Oman, not at a Pentagon briefing, but in a basement in Kyiv. October 2025, Ukraine's main intelligence directorate, the HUR, convenes a classified assessment. The subject, dependency risk. Specifically, how much of Ukraine's deep strike targeting chain relies on intelligence feeds that originate from American and NATO ISR platforms? The answer is uncomfortable. Since the earliest months of the full-scale invasion, Ukraine has benefited enormously from Western intelligence sharing. American RC-135 Rivet joint aircraft flying along NATO's eastern border intercept Russian communications. British Shadow R-1 surveillance planes map electronic emissions. And high above it all, assets like the MQ-4C Triton and RQ-4 Global Hawk provide persistent wide-area surveillance that Ukraine simply cannot replicate on its own, or couldn't, until October 2025. The HUR assessment identifies a specific vulnerability. The U.S. Navy operates only 5 mission-capable Tritons at any given time. These aircraft rotate between the Pacific, where they monitor Chinese naval activity, and the Middle East, where tensions with Iran have been escalating since the summer. If a crisis in the Persian Gulf absorbs even 2 of those Tritons, the intelligence feeds relevant to Ukraine, tracking Russian logistics corridors through the Caspian region, monitoring military rail traffic in southern Russia, mapping air defense radar emissions, could dry up overnight. Which weapon system matters more for Ukraine's survival? Western intelligence platforms or Ukrainian innovation? A. Satellites. B. Drones. C. SIGINT stations. Drop your answer in the comments. The HUR leadership doesn't debate the problem, they build a solution. Starting in November 2025, 3 parallel programs begin running simultaneously. Each one is designed to replace a specific capability that American ISR platforms provide. Together, they form what Ukrainian intelligence internally calls Sova, Owl, a nocturnal predator that sees everything and strikes from darkness. The first program focuses on aerial reconnaissance at depth. Ukraine has thousands of small tactical drones, Mavics, custom FPV platforms, modified Leleka 100 systems, but these operate within 50 to 80 kilometers of the front line. What Ukraine lacks is persistent surveillance at distances of 200 to 500 kilometers behind Russian lines, the kind of coverage a Triton provides from 50,000 feet. Ukraine's solution isn't a single platform, it's a network. The Furia reconnaissance drone, manufactured by the Ukrainian company Athlon Avia, has an operational range of approximately 50 kilometers in its standard configuration. But Ukrainian engineers have been quietly extending that range. By November 2025, modified Furia variants equipped with improved antennas and optimized power systems can operate at ranges exceeding 120 kilometers. They carry electro-optical and infrared cameras capable of identifying vehicle types at altitudes that keep them beyond the effective envelope of Russian Tor M2 short-range air defense systems. A single, modified Furia can't replace a Triton, but 12 of them, operating in overlapping relay patterns along a 400-kilometer front, can build a mosaic picture that approaches the same coverage. The second program targets satellite imagery. Ukraine has been purchasing commercial satellite data since 2022, but the procurement has been ad hoc, buying individual images when specific targets need confirmation. The Sova program changes this. In December 2025, Ukraine's defense ministry signs long-term contracts with two satellite imagery providers. ISR, the Finnish company operating synthetic aperture radar satellites, agrees to provide daily revisit coverage of key rail junctions in Rostov Oblast, Voronezh Oblast, and the Belgorod region. And Synspective, a Japanese SAR satellite operator, provides additional passes that fill the gaps in ISI's orbital schedule. Synthetic aperture radar is the critical detail here. Unlike optical satellites, SAR sees through clouds, through smoke, through darkness. A Russian ammunition train arriving at Bataysk rail junction at 3 a.m. under cloud cover is invisible to optical satellites. But an ICI SAR image captures it with meter-level resolution. Every rail car, every container, every loading crane. The cost is significant, estimated at $3 to $4 million per month for persistent coverage of 8 priority target areas. But compared to the cost of a single Triton flight hour, roughly $24,000, Ukraine is building a surveillance capability at a fraction of the price of the American platform it replaces. The third program is the most sensitive. Signals, intelligence. Stay with me here. What happens over the next 6 months doesn't just fill an intelligence gap. It destroys an entire Russian logistics plan. Ukraine has been intercepting Russian military communications since the first day of the invasion. Russian operational security, despite years of warnings, remains catastrophic. Units communicate on unencrypted radio frequencies. Officers discuss troop movements on civilian cell phones. Logistics coordinators use outdated digital encryption that Ukrainian SIGINT teams cracked months ago. But intercepts are only useful if you know where to listen. And the deeper behind Russian lines you go, the harder it is to pick up signals. The Sova program addresses this by establishing 3 new ground-based SIGINT collection stations in western Ukraine. These stations use high-gain directional antennas, massive arrays, some with dishes exceeding 12 meters, pointed east. They don't monitor frontline tactical frequencies. They monitor Russian military logistics networks deep in the rear, train dispatching frequencies, ammunition depot coordination channels, the internal communications of the Russian Missile and Artillery Directorate known as the RAID. By January 2026, these stations are operational, and within the first 2 weeks, they intercept something extraordinary. A series of communications between the RAD headquarters in Moscow and the Southern Military District Logistics Command in Rostov-on-Don. The subject, a massive ammunition resupply operation. Codename, Groza 3, Thunder 3. The intercepts are fragmentary at first, references to special cargo moving by rail from Sverdlovsk Oblast, the Urals industrial heartland, to forward staging areas in Rostov Oblast. Mentions of North Korean 152mm artillery shells packaged in distinctive wooden crates that Russian logisticians complain are poorly sealed and prone to moisture contamination. Timing references. Movement to begin in mid-February, with full delivery expected by March 10th. Ukrainian analysts pieced together the picture over several weeks. Groza 3 is not a routine resupply. It's the largest single ammunition transfer since the fall of 2024. An estimated 40,000 metric tons of artillery shells, rocket propellant, and mortar rounds, enough to sustain Russian artillery operations along the entire southern front for approximately 6 weeks at current firing rates. The destination: Bataysk rail junction, 15 kilometers south of Rostov-on-Don. From there, the ammunition will be distributed to forward depots in Donetsk Oblast, Zaporizhzhia Oblast, and Luhansk. If Groza 3 succeeds, Russian artillery will have the ammunition it needs to sustain the grinding offensive operations that have been slowly pushing Ukrainian lines in the Donetsk sector. If it fails, Russian guns go quiet. Ukraine's defense intelligence leadership briefs the general staff in late January. The recommendation is unanimous. Groza 3 must be destroyed. Not disrupted, destroyed. But destroying it requires knowing exactly when and where the ammunition trains will be at their most vulnerable. And that means maintaining continuous surveillance of the Russian rail network for weeks, This is exactly what the Sova program was built to do. February 2026. The surveillance network begins tracking Russian rail movements across a 600-kilometer corridor from the Ural Mountains to the Rostov region. Modified Furia drones launched from positions in Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk oblasts conduct nightly reconnaissance flights along the line of contact, identifying active rail routes and noting the positions of Russian mobile air defense systems that protect key junctions. ISR satellite passes, scheduled for optimal timing based on predicted train movements, capture daily imagery of Bataysk junction. Ukrainian imagery analysts begin building a pattern-of-life model. When do trains arrive? How long do they stay? Where are the loading docks? Where are the fuel storage tanks? Where do the crews sleep? And the SIGINT stations listen. Every frequency, every night. Subscribe to Ukraine Signal if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Because what you're watching isn't just a documentary. It's a blueprint for how a smaller nation builds an intelligence machine that rivals a superpower's. By mid-February, the picture is nearly complete. Ukrainian analysts have identified the primary rail route for Groza 3, originating at ammunition depots near Nizhny Tagil in Sverdlovsk Oblast, running south through Chelyabinsk, then west through Saratov and Volgograd to Bataysk. The journey covers approximately 2,200 kilometers by rail. Transit time, 4 to 5 days per train. The first train departs Nizhny Tagil on February 18, 2026. Ukrainian SIGINT intercepts the departure notification. A logistics coordinator in the Sverdlovsk depot confirms loading completion and departure to the RAD headquarters. The message includes the train's identification number, its cargo manifest designation, and its estimated arrival time at Bataysk, February 22nd. Over the following 2 weeks, Ukrainian intelligence tracks 7 separate ammunition trains making the same journey. Each carries between 4,000 and 6,000 metric tons of ordnance. The ISR satellite captures images of the first trains arriving at Bataysk on February 23rd. The rail cars are distinctive, flatbed cars loaded with green-painted containers surrounded by security cordons and mobile air defense vehicles. By March 1st, approximately 28,000 metric tons have arrived at Bataysk. The remaining trains are still en route, and then everything changes. March 3rd, 2026. The SIGINT stations intercept an urgent communication. The Russian Southern Military District Logistics Command has ordered the Bataysk junction to begin forward distribution immediately. Trucks and smaller rail transfers will begin moving ammunition to 3 forward depots, one near Mariupol, one near Volnovakha, and one near Tokmak. Once the ammunition disperses to 3 locations instead of 1, the targeting problem becomes 3 times harder. Ukraine has days, not weeks, to act. But there's a problem. The optimal strike weapon, HIMARS firing ATACMS tactical ballistic missiles, has the range to reach Bataysk from positions in Ukrainian-controlled territory, approximately 280 kilometers from the nearest viable launch point in Zaporizhia Oblast, within the 300-kilometer range of the ATACMS Block IA variant. The problem isn't range. The problem is Russian air defense. Bataysk sits within the engagement envelopes of at least 2 S-400 batteries positioned near Rostov-on-Don. The S-400's 48N6E3 missiles have a maximum intercept range of 250 kilometers against ballistic targets. An ATACMS missile traveling at approximately Mach 3.5 during its terminal phase is detectable by the S-400's 92N6E engagement radar at a range of roughly 150 kilometers. That gives the Russian operators approximately 45 seconds to detect, track, and engage the incoming missile. 45 seconds is enough. The S-400 system can transition from standby to engagement in under 10 seconds. Against a single ATACMS missile, the probability of intercept is estimated at 60 to 70%. Against a coordinated salvo of 6 missiles arriving simultaneously from different azimuths, the probability drops to less than 15% per missile. Ukraine doesn't have enough ATACMS for a saturation attack. The missiles are scarce. Each one costs approximately $1.5 million, and the United States has been reluctant to provide them in large quantities. Ukrainian stocks in March 2026 are estimated at fewer than 40 missiles remaining. The targeting team runs the calculations. A strike on Bataysk junction requires a minimum of 4 ATACMS missiles to ensure at least 2 penetrate the S-400 screen. But the ammunition stored at the junction is spread across multiple rail cars over an area of approximately 800 by 400 meters. 4 missiles aren't enough to destroy the entire stockpile. The solution comes from an unlikely source. A 28-year-old artillery officer named Captain Terrace, his surname is classified, who serves as the targeting coordinator for the HIMARS battery assigned to the operation. Captain Terrace proposes a 2-phase strike. Phase 1, blind the S-400. Phase 2, destroy the ammunition. The plan is elegant. 2 ATACMS missiles will target the 9-2N6E engagement radar of the nearest S-400 battery. This radar is the eyes of the system. Without it, the S-400 cannot guide its interceptor missiles. Kill the radar, and the air defense umbrella over Bataysk collapses. How many of the 7 ammunition trains did Ukraine ultimately catch at Bataysk? A. 4 trains. B. 5 trains. C. 6 trains. The answer comes at the end. Phase 2 launches 90 seconds later. 4 ATACMS missiles targeted at the 4 largest concentrations of rail cars within the Bataysk junction. With the S-400 radar destroyed, these missiles will fly uncontested. Total expenditure, 6 ATACMS missiles, 15% of Ukraine's remaining stock. If the strike succeeds, it destroys 6 weeks of Russian artillery ammunition. If it fails, Ukraine has wasted irreplaceable precision weapons on an air defense system that may already have backup radars. The decision goes to the highest levels. Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief General Oleksandr Syrsky personally approves the strike on March 5th, but the timing remains uncertain. Ukrainian intelligence needs to confirm that the maximum number of trains are still at Bataysk before the forward distribution disperses the cargo. March 7th. ISR satellite imagery shows 5 of the 7 trains still at the junction. 2 have already begun offloading to truck convoys. Time is running out. March 8, 2026, 1:15 a.m. A modified Furia reconnaissance drone launches from a concealed position in Zaporizhzhia Oblast. Its mission: conduct a final reconnaissance pass along the approach corridor to confirm the positions of Russian mobile air defense assets between the launch point and Bataysk. The drone flies at 1,200 meters altitude, below the detection threshold of the S-400 surveillance radar, but high enough to image the terrain with its infrared camera. Over the next 3 hours, it maps the positions of 2 Panzer S one-point defense systems, 1 Tor M2 battery, and 3 Buk M3 launchers positioned along the likely missile flight path. This information is critical. ATACMS missiles follow a ballistic trajectory. They arc high, then plunge toward the target at steep angles. But during the boost phase, when the rocket motor is burning and the missile is climbing, it's vulnerable to interception by systems like Buk M3, which has a maximum engagement altitude of 25 kilometers. If a Buk battery is positioned directly under the boost phase trajectory, it could intercept an ATACMS before it reaches its apex. Captain Terrace adjusts the launch geometry. Instead of firing directly east toward Bataysk, the HIMARS launchers will displace 18 kilometers south, launching from a position that angles the missile trajectories away from the identified Buk positions. The missiles will arc over a corridor where the Furia identified no air defense coverage, a gap between the Buk M3 at Melitopol and the Pantsir at Berdyansk. March 8, 2026. 11:30 p.m. 2M14. 2 HIMARS launchers roll out of concealed positions in tree lines south of Zaporizhzhia. Each launcher carries a single ATACMS pod. A third HIMARS positioned 4 kilometers north carries a second pair of ATACMS. A fourth launcher, holding the final 2 missiles for Phase 2, waits at a separate location 7 kilometers west. If you believe tactics win wars, type Ukraine signal in the comments, because what you're about to hear is the textbook definition of combined arms precision. The launch sequence is choreographed to the second. Phase 1 fires first. Phase 2 waits exactly 90 seconds. March 9, 2026, 12:01 a.m. Phase 1. The first HIMARS fires. The ATACMS missile erupts from its canister with a roar that shakes the ground for a kilometer in every direction. The solid rocket motor burns for 24 seconds, accelerating the 3,700-pound missile to Mach 3 as it climbs through 30 kilometers altitude. Then, the motor cuts out. The missile is now a ballistic projectile arcing east through the upper atmosphere at 3,600 kilometers per hour. 7 seconds later, the second HIMARS fires. Its ATACMS follows the same trajectory but offset by 400 meters laterally, ensuring that even if Russian radar detects the first missile, the engagement computer must split its tracking between two inbound targets. The S-400 battery east of Rostov detects the first missile at 12:01:38 a.m. The 91N6E surveillance radar paints the contact. The 92N6E engagement radar slews to track. The system classifies the target as a tactical ballistic missile. Threat level, critical. The engagement sequence initiates automatically. 248N6E 3 interceptor missiles launch from their vertical tubes. They accelerate to Mach 6, climbing toward the projected intercept point. But the ATACMS missiles are not aimed at what the S-400 is protecting. They're aimed at the S-400 itself. The first interceptor missile reaches its calculated intercept point and detonates its fragmentation warhead. It scores a partial hit. Fragments strike the first ATACMS, damaging its guidance fins. The missile tumbles, its trajectory destabilized. The second ATACMS is untouched. At 12:02:14 a.m., the second ATACMS enters its terminal phase. It dives at a 70-degree angle, accelerating under gravity to Mach 3.5. Its GPS-aided inertial navigation guides it toward a set of coordinates, the exact position of the 92N6E engagement radar, identified by Ukrainian SIGINT based on emission triangulation conducted over the previous 4 weeks. Impact: the 560-pound WDU-18 blast fragmentation warhead detonates 8 meters from the radar vehicle. The explosion shreds the phased array antenna, kills the 3 operators inside the cabin, and sends a debris cloud 200 meters in every direction. Secondary fires ignite in the radar's power generation trailer. The S-400 battery east of Rostov-on-Don is blind. 90 seconds pass. Phase 2. At 12:03:44 a.m., 4 ATACMS missiles launch in rapid succession from 2 positions. They climb into the night sky, their rocket motors painting bright orange trails visible for 50 kilometers. But there's no S-400 radar to track them. The Panzer S-1 system at the junction detects the inbound missiles at a range of 22 kilometers, but the Panzer's 57E6 missile has a maximum engagement range of 20 kilometers against ballistic targets. By the time the system calculates a firing solution, the ATACMS are already inside the minimum engagement distance. The first missile strikes at 12:04:51 a.m. It impacts a cluster of 14 railcars loaded with 152mm artillery shells. The warhead detonates, and for a fraction of a second, the explosion is a standard blast fragmentation event. Then, the ammunition cooks off. The secondary explosion is catastrophic. Thousands of 152mm shells detonate in a cascading chain reaction that tears through the railcars like a wave. The blast overpressure flattens a maintenance building 300 meters away. A fireball rises 500 meters into the night sky. The thermal signature is visible on Ukrainian infrared satellite imagery, taken 11 minutes later. The second missile strikes 200 meters north, hitting a row of flatbed cars carrying Grad rocket propellant canisters. The propellant doesn't explode, it burns. An enormous fire erupts, generating temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius. The steel railcars melt, the tracks beneath them twist into grotesque shapes. The third missile hits the eastern loading dock, the area where trucks were being loaded for forward distribution. 8 trucks, partially loaded with mortar rounds, are destroyed instantly. The drivers and loading crews, estimated at 40 to 60 personnel, are caught in the open. The fourth missile lands in the central marshalling yard, destroying the rail switching equipment that controls train movements throughout the junction. Even if the remaining railcars survive, they cannot be moved. Bataysk junction is functionally destroyed. The explosions continue for over 2 hours. Secondary detonations ripple through the ammunition stores as fire spreads from railcar to railcar. Ukrainian SIGINT stations intercept frantic communications from the Bataysk garrison, requests for fire suppression units, reports of casualties, desperate pleas to the Southern Military District headquarters for guidance. One intercept, captured at 12:47 a.m., features a Russian logistics colonel screaming into a radio handset. The translation reads, "Everything is burning. Everything. The entire western yard is gone. We have no water pressure. The pump station is destroyed. I need helicopters for casualty evacuation. Where are the helicopters? What would NATO have done differently in planning this strike? Would a different approach have neutralized the S-400 more cleanly? Drop your analysis in the comments. The helicopters don't come. Russian aviation assets in the Rostov region are grounded. Commanders fear that Ukrainian drones may be loitering in the area, waiting to target aircraft on the ground or during takeoff. The fear is justified. A Ukrainian Furia drone orbiting at 90 kilometers distance is recording the entire event on infrared camera. The footage would later be released by the Ukrainian General Staff, showing the progression of fires across the junction over a 4-hour period. By dawn on March 9th, the scale of the destruction becomes clear. Ukrainian intelligence, combining satellite imagery from ICI and the Furia drone footage, conducts a battle damage assessment. The results are extraordinary. 5 of the 7 ammunition trains at Bataysk are destroyed or rendered unsalvageable. An estimated 22,000 to 25,000 metric tons of ordnance detonated, burned, or contaminated beyond use. This represents approximately 55 to 60% of the total Groza 3 shipment. The rail junction itself is non-functional, switching equipment destroyed. At least 800 meters of track warped beyond repair. Loading infrastructure demolished. Estimated repair time, 4 to 6 weeks minimum. Personnel casualties. Ukrainian General Staff reports estimate 80 to 120 Russian logistics personnel eliminated at the junction, including the garrison security detachment. Russian sources monitoring intercepted casualty reports suggest the number may be higher, possibly exceeding 150. The S-400 engagement radar is confirmed destroyed. The battery's interceptor missile launchers are intact, but useless without their targeting radar. Russia will need to deploy a replacement 9-2N6E from strategic reserves, a process that typically takes 2 to 3 weeks. Total Russian material losses from the Bataysk strike, estimated at $380 to $420 million when accounting for the destroyed ammunition, rail infrastructure, vehicles, and the S-400 radar. Ukrainian expenditure, 6 ATACMS missiles. Approximate cost, $9 million. Cost exchange ratio, roughly 42 to 1 in Ukraine's favor. Real tactics, real consequences, Ukraine signal. Now, let's return to where this story began. The Triton, April 3, 2026, 3.5 weeks after the Bataysk strike. The U.S. Navy confirms the loss of an MQ-4C Triton drone during operations near Iranian airspace. The Pentagon provides few details, but defense analysts quickly note that the drone was operating as part of the intelligence architecture supporting operations related to Iran, monitoring naval movements, tracking missile sites, providing communications relay coverage. What the public doesn't know, but what Ukrainian intelligence already understood, is that the same Triton fleet also contributed to a broader surveillance picture that included Russian military activity. Tritons operating from SIGINT, Sicily, had periodically overflown the Black Sea and Eastern Mediterranean, collecting radar emissions data and imaging naval traffic. Some of this data, filtered through intelligence sharing agreements, found its way into Ukrainian targeting databases. With the Triton lost and the remaining aircraft redeployed to cover the Iran blockade, this peripheral surveillance coverage disappears entirely. But it doesn't matter. Within 48 hours of the Triton's loss, the Sova network, the same system that had tracked and destroyed Groza 3, intercepts new Russian logistics communications. The subject, replacement ammunition shipments being rerouted through alternative rail corridors to compensate for the Bataysk destruction. The Russians are trying again. Different route, same destination. Ukrainian SIGINT identifies the new corridor, ammunition moving from Volgograd south through Krasnodar to a secondary rail junction at Krimsk, 60 kilometers south of Krasnodar. From there, a branch line runs to the Kerch Strait ferry crossing, and onward to occupied Crimea and the southern front. The Sova system tracks the new trains. Satellite imagery confirms their arrival at Krimsk on April 8th. A Furia drone maps the air defense coverage around the junction. On April 10, 2026, a second HIMARS strike, this time using standard M31A1 guided rockets at a closer range target, destroys the Krimsk transshipment point. Ukrainian General Staff reports confirm 14 rail cars destroyed, 3,500 metric tons of ammunition eliminated. The intelligence that enabled this strike came entirely from Ukrainian-built systems. 0 American ISR platforms involved. 0 NATO intelligence feeds, pure Sova. This is the real story, not the loss of a drone, the loss of a dependency. For 2.5 years, Ukraine relied on American and Western intelligence as a critical input to its targeting chain. That reliance was understandable. The United States operates the most sophisticated surveillance architecture in human history. Leveraging it was the rational choice, but rationality includes planning for the day that support diminishes. And Ukraine quietly and methodically built exactly that contingency. The Sova program cost approximately $45 million over 6 months, covering drone modifications, satellite imagery contracts, SIGINT station construction, and personnel training. For comparison, a single MQ-4C Triton costs $240 million to procure and approximately $24,000 per flight hour to operate. Ukraine built a functional surveillance network for less than 1/5 the cost of the drone it replaced. And that network delivered targeting data that destroyed over $400 million in Russian military assets in a single month. Innovation doesn't require the biggest budget. It requires the clearest understanding of the problem. Now, the answer to our earlier question: how many of the 7 ammunition trains did Ukraine catch at Bataysk? The answer is C, 6 trains. 5 were destroyed directly in the ATACMS strike and its secondary explosions. A 6th, partially offloaded but still containing approximately 2,000 metric tons, was rendered unsalvageable when fires from the adjacent railcars spread and detonated its remaining cargo over the following hours. Only 1 train, the 7th, which had departed Bataysk the previous morning, escaped destruction. 6 out of 7. An 86% destruction rate on the largest Russian ammunition transfer of the war. So here are the questions that matter. Was the decision to spend 15% of Ukraine's remaining ATACMS stockpile on a single strike the right call? 6 missiles for $400 million in damage says yes. But what if the next high-value target appears next week and those 6 missiles are gone? Could Russia have prevented this? The intelligence failures were staggering. Unencrypted logistics communications, predictable rail routing, and an S-400 battery whose radar position was identified weeks in advance through signal emissions. Would better operational security have saved Groza 3? And what would you have done differently? Would you have waited for all 7 trains to arrive, risking dispersal, or struck earlier, accepting a smaller kill? Subscribe to Ukraine Signal, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. Bataysk Junction is quiet now. The fires burned for 3 days. Russian repair crews arrived on March 12th, working under camouflage netting to rebuild the tracks. But the ammunition is gone. 25,000 tons of shells that were supposed to feed Russian guns along the southern front, reduced to twisted metal and scorched earth. And somewhere in western Ukraine, the Sova network is still listening, still watching, still building the next targeting package. Because Ukraine doesn't wait for its allies to see the battlefield. Ukraine builds its own eyes, and those eyes never blink. Real tactics, real consequences. Stay vigilant.